Welcome to Monk's Temple. Before we begin, let's do something simple together. Just pause. Feel your body exactly where you are. Feel the weight of it against the chair, the floor, the bed. Notice your breath moving in and out, all by itself, without any effort from you. You don't need to change it. Just notice it. This simple act of noticing, of being present with what is the foundation for everything we're going to explore today. We're going to talk about something that lives at the very core of being human. Something that drives our biggest decisions, our deepest pains, and our most confusing contradictions. We're going to talk about desire. And not just any desire, but the one that carries the most charge, the most cultural baggage, the most personal secrecy. Sexual desire. If you've ever tried to get a straight answer about this from any spiritual tradition, you know it's like trying to catch smoke. On one side, voices tell you it's dirty, dangerous, something to be controlled. On the other side, voices tell you it's natural, that repression is the real problem, that freedom means following your desires wherever they lead. And caught in the middle, there's just us, ordinary human beings, trying to figure out how to navigate this powerful force without guilt, without harm, without making a mess of our lives. This video is not going to take either side. It's going to do something different. It's going to invite you to step outside the battlefield entirely and look from a different vantage point. Because the tradition we're drawing from today, the ancient wisdom of the Buddha, doesn't ask, is it allowed or forbidden? It asks a much more interesting question. What is your mind doing right now? That question changes everything. It moves from a rulebook written by someone else to an internal investigation only you can conduct. From morality to psychology. From judgment to awareness. From shame to clarity. And that's where the real work begins. My name is Matt, and this is Monk's Temple. Today, we're going to do what most conversations about this topic avoid. We're going to get honest. We're going to look at what the Buddha actually taught about desire, not what people have projected onto him. We're going to look at how monks practice, how lay people practice, and why the answers differ. We're going to look at Tantra, which is almost nothing like what you think. And most importantly, we're going to look at you. At the secret questions you might be afraid to ask. At the patterns you might be afraid to see. This isn't going to make you uncomfortable because of anything explicit I say. It's going to make you uncomfortable because the real questions are so much harder than, is this okay? They're questions about who you are, what you're really looking for, and what you're using desire to avoid feeling. So let's start with what Buddhism actually asks of us. Most people imagine Buddhism as a list of rules. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, meditate a lot, be peaceful. But the heart of the Buddha's teaching is not about following rules. It's about seeing clearly. It's about waking up from automatic living and actually seeing how your own mind works. Think of it this way. Imagine you have a headache. You go to a doctor who barely looks at you and hands you the same pill he gives everyone. That's a rule-based approach. One size fits all. Now imagine a different doctor. She sits with you. She asks questions. When did it start? Where is the pain? What does it feel like? What makes it better? What makes it worse? She's not giving you a rule. She's making a diagnosis. She's trying to see your unique condition. The Buddha was that second kind of doctor. He called himself a physician of the human condition. The disease he diagnosed is dukkha, often translated as suffering, but it's bigger than that. It's that background hum of dissatisfaction. The way even our happiest moments are tinged with anxiety, with the knowledge they won't last. The feeling that something is missing, that we're incomplete, that if we could just get the right thing, we'd finally feel okay. And what did the Buddha identify as the cause? This is where most people get it wrong. The cause, recorded in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, is not desire itself. It's a specific kind of desire. In Pali, tanha. Thirst. Craving. The compulsive, desperate reaching for something outside ourselves to make the inside feel better. Imagine dying of thirst in a desert. Your body needs water. That's a natural signal. But tanha is the mirage. The shimmering pool that isn't really there. You run toward it, exhausting yourself, only to find more sand. The suffering isn't the need for water. The suffering is the chase after the illusion. So when we apply this to sexual desire, we have to make a distinction most people never make. There's a difference between the natural capacity for pleasure and intimacy, and the compulsive craving that says, I need this. I can't be okay without this. This will finally make me feel whole. The Buddha wasn't against pleasure. He was a realist. He saw that pleasure is real but unreliable. It comes and goes. Like a beautiful sunset. You can enjoy it, be fully present with it, but you can't make it stay. If you build your well-being on the assumption the sunset will last forever, you're setting yourself up for pain when the sun goes down. Here's a story about a friend named Elena. She was a successful photographer in her 40s, traveled the world, had exciting relationships everywhere. But she came to me with a problem. She said, I'm addicted to the beginning of things. The first kiss, the first night. That's when I feel alive. But as soon as things settle, I get bored. I notice flaws. I fantasize about someone new. What's wrong with me? I asked, when you're in that beginning, what are you feeling? She closed her eyes. I feel seen. Wanted. Like I matter. Like I'm complete. And when it becomes ordinary, her face fell. I feel invisible again. Like I'm just me. And that's not enough. Elena wasn't addicted to sex. She was addicted to being completed by someone else's desire. She was using intensity to escape the discomfort of being ordinary Elena with ordinary fears. The sex was the delivery mechanism, but the drug was something else. Validation. Escape. Anesthetic for pain she didn't know she carried. This is what the Buddha pointed at. Not the act. What the act is used to avoid. Not pleasure. Whether pleasure is becoming a prison. Not desire. Whether desire is driving you, or you're seeing it clearly. Let's go deeper into this distinction, because it's the key that unlocks everything. The Buddha gave us 3 words in Pali that act like a scalpel, cutting through all the confusion we have about desire. Think of them as 3 different flavors of one experience. Learning to tell them apart is like learning to distinguish real thirst from a mirage. The first word is kama. This simply means sensual pleasure. The taste of chocolate melting on your tongue. The warmth of sunlight on your skin. The beauty of a face you love. The joy of physical intimacy. Kama is not the problem. Kama is part of being alive. The Buddha never said these pleasures were evil. He said they were unreliable. They're like a delicious meal. When you're eating it, it's wonderful. But an hour later, you're thinking about the next meal. The pleasure doesn't last, and it was never meant to. The mistake isn't enjoying the meal. The mistake is building your entire sense of well-being on the assumption that every meal will be perfect and that pleasure can permanently satisfy a hunger that isn't physical. The second word is tanha. This is the craving we talked about. The thirst. It's not the pleasure itself. It's the frantic mental grab for it. It's the voice that says, I need that again. I need more. I need it to last longer. I need it to be better than last time. Tanha is the energy of addiction. It's what turns a glass of wine into a bottle. It's what turns a pleasant memory into an obsession. It's what turns a beautiful person into an object you feel you must possess. The third word is upadana. This means clinging, attachment. This is what happens after tanha gets what it wants. You get the thing, the person, the experience, and then you try to freeze it. You build a fortress around it. You build your identity around it. I am the person who has this. I need this person to be happy. This feeling must never end. This clinging is where suffering is born. Because everything changes. Everything ends. The person leaves. The feeling fades. The fortress crumbles. And we are left wounded in the rubble, wondering what went wrong. So when we bring this framework to sexuality, the questions become completely different. The question isn't, can I have sex? The questions are, am I experiencing kama, simple pleasure, or am I in the grip of tanha, compulsive craving? Can I experience intimacy without upadana, without needing to possess and freeze the other person? What happens when the moment ends? Do I let go with grace, or do I collapse? Most of us, if we're brutally honest, have to answer that we collapse. Or at least we wobble. We grasp. We text too much. We analyze. We feel that familiar panic when someone doesn't call back. That panic is the voice of upadana. It's the clinging mind screaming that something essential has been taken away. Here's another story to illustrate this. A friend of mine named Marcus was a brilliant therapist. He helped couples navigate the most difficult territory in their relationships. He was wise, compassionate, and incredibly skilled. But his own love life was a disaster. He'd been divorced twice, and his relationships followed a painful pattern. He'd meet someone wonderful. There would be months of intense connection. And then, inevitably, he'd start to feel suffocated. He'd pull away. The relationship would end. And he'd be devastated, convinced he was fundamentally flawed and incapable of love. One day, after another breakup, he was sitting in my kitchen, head in his hands. He said, I help people fix their relationships all day. Why can't I fix my own? I asked him a question. When you're in a relationship, what are you most afraid of? He thought for a long time. Then he said, I'm afraid of being left. So I leave first. I pull away before they can. Marcus wasn't afraid of intimacy. He was afraid of the pain of loss. So he created the very thing he feared. He would grasp so tightly at the beginning, trying to lock the relationship down, trying to make it permanent and safe. And then the fear of losing it would become so overwhelming that he'd sabotage it just to regain some sense of control. The sex was amazing, he said. But the moment after, the morning after, was often filled with this creeping anxiety. He was using the intensity of connection to medicate a deeper fear, a fear that had nothing to do with the person in front of him. This is what the Buddha means by the mind that grasps suffers. The grasping itself is the problem. Not the person. Not the relationship. Not the pleasure. The desperate, terrified clutching at something that by its very nature is impermanent. So the practice becomes one of learning to hold things differently. Not with a clenched fist, but with an open hand. You can still hold. You can still love. You can still experience deep intimacy and pleasure. But your hand is open. You're not squeezing the life out of the experience, trying to make it last forever. You're present with it, fully, knowing it will pass. And because you're not clinging, when it does pass, your hand is already open. You don't lose anything because you were never holding on in the first place. This is the paradox at the heart of the Buddha's teaching. The more you try to hold on to pleasure, the more it slips through your fingers. The more you try to possess someone, the more they become an object, and the less you actually experience them. The more you try to make yourself safe from loss, the more you build a prison. So if the problem is grasping and not the act itself, this naturally leads us to a question that confuses almost everyone. Why do some Buddhists take vows of celibacy and remove sex entirely, while other Buddhists are married with children, living ordinary family lives? The answer reveals something essential about how Buddhism works. Buddhism is not a one-size-fits-all religion. It's more like a vast mountain with many different paths to the summit. Different people, with different temperaments, different capacities, different life situations, take different routes. And what works for one person might be completely wrong for another. One path is the path of the monastic. These are the men and women who have left ordinary householder life to dedicate themselves entirely to uprooting craving at its deepest level. They follow the Vinaya Pitaka, the ancient code of monastic discipline, which includes over 200 rules. Among these are the 4 Parajika rules, the defeat rules. The first of these is sexual intercourse. For a fully ordained monk or nun, any sexual act means automatic and permanent expulsion from the monastic order. One violation, and you're out. Now, if you hear this and think, aha, so Buddhism does think sex is bad, you've missed the point entirely. This rule isn't a moral judgment. It's a practical training rule for people on a very specific path. Think of it this way. Imagine you're training to be an Olympic sprinter. Your goal is to run 100 meters faster than any human has ever run. Your training involves hours on the track, specific exercises, precise nutrition. Everything in your life is optimized for that one goal. Now imagine someone suggests you also take up marathon running and weightlifting. Those are wonderful activities, but they develop different muscles, different energy systems. They would interfere with your sprint training. They would be distractions from your singular goal. For a monk or nun, the goal is to see the nature of reality so clearly, so directly, that craving is uprooted forever. This requires an unprecedented level of focus. It requires hours of meditation daily, often 6 to 8 hours or more. It requires simplifying life to the bare essentials so the mind has nothing to latch onto. A romantic relationship, even a healthy and loving one, is a massive investment of energy. It's not just the time spent with a partner. It's the mental real estate they occupy. The worrying, the planning, the memories, the fantasies, the conversations replayed and analyzed. All of this is fuel for the mind's tendency to spin and grasp. Imagine you're trying to meditate, watching your breath, watching thoughts arise and pass. Your back aches. Your knees hurt. You're bored. And then a memory surfaces. A face. A touch. A moment of intimacy. The mind, hungry for something more interesting than the breath, latches onto it. A fantasy begins to unfold. If the mind had the option, it would chase that fantasy for hours. So monks remove the option. They create conditions where that particular distraction is simply not available. Celibacy for a monk isn't a punishment. It isn't a rejection of the body. It's an optimization for a very specific and very demanding kind of inner work. But here's what most people never hear. The vast majority of Buddhists throughout history have not been monks. They've been farmers and merchants, parents and partners, kings and servants. People living in the world, with all its complexity, its relationships, its demands. And for them, there is a completely different code. The 5 precepts, or Pankasila, are the training rules for lay people. They're not commandments. They're voluntary undertakings, guidelines for living with less harm and more awareness. Don't kill. Don't steal. Don't engage in sexual misconduct. Don't lie. Don't use intoxicants that cloud the mind. Notice the third one. It doesn't say don't have sex. It says don't engage in sexual misconduct. In Pali, kamisu mikakara. So the whole question becomes, what counts as misconduct? And the answer isn't a list of forbidden acts. It's a framework based on harm. Sexual misconduct is any sexual behavior that involves harm, deception, or exploitation. Harm is obvious. Rape, coercion, any form of sexual violence. Deception is cheating on a partner who trusts you, lying to get someone into bed, promising commitment you don't intend to keep. Exploitation covers situations with power imbalance. Teacher and student, boss and employee, therapist and client. Using a position of power to exploit someone vulnerable. Taking advantage of someone who's intoxicated or unable to give clear consent. The precept isn't about policing pleasure. It's about preventing suffering. It's not a free pass, and it's not a ban. It's a harm filter. And because life is complicated, Buddhism doesn't give you a bedroom checklist. It gives you a mirror. Honesty, consent, non-harm. That's it. The questions don't change based on who you're with or what you're doing. Is there honesty? Is there consent? Is there mutual care? If there's manipulation, secrecy, or exploitation, Buddhism calls that suffering in the making. The early Buddhist texts include many examples of lay people who reached profound levels of awakening while living ordinary householder lives. Anathapindika was a wealthy merchant, a layman, who became one of the Buddha's most important supporters. He reached a high stage of awakening while running his business, managing his wealth, and raising his family. Visakha was a laywoman, a mother and grandmother, who also reached advanced stages of spiritual development. The point is simple and often overlooked. Awakening was never reserved for monks. The path of the householder, lived with awareness and ethics, was always recognized as a valid path to freedom. So when someone tells you that real Buddhists don't have sex, they're confusing two completely different paths. Monks choose celibacy for a specific reason, as an optimization for intensive practice. Laypeople follow a different code, one that includes intimacy, relationship, and family. Both are real Buddhism. Both have produced awakened beings for over 2,000 years. And now we have to multiply this complexity across cultures, because Buddhism didn't stay in one place. It traveled. It crossed mountains and oceans, adapted to new languages, new customs, new ways of being human. And each culture that received Buddhism put its own stamp on how these teachings are lived. Let's travel to Japan. If you visit a Buddhist temple there today, the priest who greets you might very well be married, with children who will one day inherit the temple. This is the norm for many Japanese Buddhist schools. During the Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century, the government issued a decree allowing Buddhist priests to marry. But for some traditions, like the Jodo Shinshu school founded by Shinran Shonin in the 13th century, this wasn't new. Shinran openly married and had 6 children. He taught that the deepest realization could be found right in the middle of ordinary life, not by fleeing from it. For a Jodo Shinshu priest today, being a husband and father is part of their Buddhist practice, not a deviation from it. Is this real Buddhism? According to millions of Japanese Buddhists, yes. It's their Buddhism, shaped by their history and their culture. Now fly with me to the forests of northeast Thailand. Here, you will find monks in the Thai forest tradition, following teachers like Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Mun. Their practice is one of extreme renunciation. They live in simple huts deep in the forest. They spend hours in meditation daily. They maintain strict rules of conduct. For them, celibacy is absolute. They don't just avoid sexual contact. They minimize contact with women entirely. Not out of fear or misogyny. As a profound and practical protection for a mind trying to reach the most subtle states of concentration. A single moment of distraction can be like a rock thrown into a perfectly still pond, shattering the clarity they've worked so hard to develop. Both of these are authentic expressions of Buddhism. One path finds realization in the heart of family. The other finds it in the solitude of the forest. They're not contradicting each other. They're optimized for different people, different goals, different contexts. Let's travel to Tibet. Here the picture becomes even more complex. The Gelug school, the Dalai Lama's tradition, maintains strict monastic celibacy. For a Gelugpa monk, any sexual activity is a root downfall. But in the Nyingma, Kagyu, and Sakya schools, you find married lamas and tantric practitioners called Ngakpas. These are often householders with families and jobs who also engage in deep esoteric practices. They're not monks in the same sense. They're following a different Vajrayana path that includes the possibility of enlightened family life. Ask a Zen master about ritual. Ask a Pure Land priest about grace. Ask a Tibetan Lama about visualization. You'll get different answers because they're different expressions of the same underlying principles. There is no single Buddhist position on sexuality. There are traditions shaped by culture, history, and practice emphasis. What they share is the same underlying question. The question about desire and attachment, about what the mind is doing, about whether we're creating suffering or freedom. When someone says Buddhism teaches X about sex, the honest response is to ask, which Buddhism? Because the answer matters. The diversity matters. It reminds us that we're not looking for a single rule to follow. We're learning to ask better questions. Questions that apply no matter who we are, where we live, or who we love. This brings us to a topic that has been more misunderstood, more romanticized, and more commercialized than almost any other aspect of Buddhism. Tantra. When most people in the West hear this word, they think of massage oils and sacred sexuality workshops. Weekend retreats with chanting and intimate touch. Basically, foreplay with Sanskrit words. We've turned Tantra into a brand, a way to make sexuality feel spiritual without actually changing anything. The reality is almost nothing like this. In the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition, Tantra is one of the most demanding, rigorous, and, frankly, dangerous spiritual paths ever developed. It's not for everyone. It's not for most people. It's an advanced practice for a tiny minority of highly trained adepts who have spent years, sometimes decades, preparing. The foundational practice of Vajrayana is not sex. It's Ngondro. A series of preliminary practices that often involve completing 100,000 prostrations. 100,000 Vajrasattva mantra recitations. 100,000 mandala offerings. 100,000 guru yoga practices. This is just the warm-up. It can take 3 to 5 years of daily practice, sometimes longer. And all of this is designed to develop a profound and stable understanding of emptiness, or shunyata. Emptiness doesn't mean nothingness. It means that all phenomena, including ourselves, are empty of inherent, independent existence. They exist, but only in relationship to everything else. They're like a rainbow. It appears vividly, with color and form, beautiful and real. But if you try to grasp it, your hand closes on empty air. It was never a thing you could possess. It was always a play of light and water. You have to understand this not just intellectually, but in your bones, before you can even begin to consider advanced tantric practices. Only after years of this training, and only with the explicit authorization of a qualified guru, might a practitioner engage in practices involving a physical consort. When you see those iconic Tibetan images of a male and female deity in sexual union, yab yum, this is not pornography. It's not a depiction of celestial pleasure. It's a profound symbol. The male figure represents compassion and skillful means. The female figure represents wisdom and emptiness. Their union represents the non-dual nature of reality, the inseparability of these two essential qualities. The practice uses the most powerful, most biologically compelling energy we have, sexual energy, as a tool to directly experience this non-duality. It's a method to shatter the illusion of a separate self. To use the intense experience of merging with another to glimpse the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. The dissolution of subject and object. The realization that the lover and the beloved are not two separate things. Imagine a retreat so intense, so demanding, that the usual boundaries of self begin to dissolve. Darkness, silence, hours of practice. The mind starts to loosen its grip on ordinary reality. Now imagine introducing the most powerful energy you know into that container. This isn't about adding pleasure. It's about dismantling who you think you are. Using desire itself as a tool to cut through the last remaining layers of illusion. To think you can do this without years of preparation isn't just naive. It's dangerous. It would be like watching a video of a brain surgeon performing a delicate operation and thinking, cool, I can do that. I have a knife. That's what claiming you're doing tantric practice without training sounds like to actual Vajrayana practitioners. This isn't elitism. It's safety. These practices can destabilize people. They can amplify the very grasping they're meant to dissolve. When power and desire mix without proper foundation, people get hurt. Psychologically, emotionally, sometimes physically. Buddhist history, like all human history, has its shadows. The requirements are clear. Years of preliminary training. Deep understanding of Buddhist philosophy. Teacher authorization, not optional. Partner equally trained. Specific retreat conditions. If you don't have all of that, you're just having sex, which is fine. But call it what it is. For most of us, Tantra is not a relevant part of our practice. It's a fascinating and beautiful part of the tradition, a testament to the profound depths the human mind can reach. But it's not a prescription. It's a reminder that even the most powerful forces in our lives, if met with profound wisdom and discipline, can become part of the path to freedom. We don't start there. We start with the breath. We start with the precepts. We start with learning to see our own craving clearly. The advanced practices are for later. Much later. If ever. This leads us to an area where people often look for simple rules and find complex, evolving conversations. Questions about sexual orientation and gender identity. When someone asks what Buddhism says about being gay or transgender, the honest answer is that the early texts don't address these questions the way we ask them now. The Pali Canon, the earliest collection of the Buddha's discourses, was compiled over 2,000 years ago in a culture with completely different understandings of human identity and sexuality. What the texts do provide is a consistent lens. The definition of sexual misconduct in the third precept for lay people focuses on harm, deception, and exploitation. It's completely silent on the gender of the people involved. The ethical principle isn't about who you love. It's about how you love. Is your relationship based on honesty, consent, and mutual care? Or is it based on manipulation, betrayal, and causing harm? The lens doesn't change based on sexual orientation. It applies equally to everyone. The monastic code, the Vinaya, is different. It prohibits all sexual activity for monks and nuns, period. The gender of the partner is irrelevant. Celibacy is celibacy. The Vinaya does contain references to a category of person sometimes translated as Pandaka, which scholars have debated for centuries. What seems clear is that this term doesn't map neatly onto any modern category like gay or transgender. What it does show is that the ancient compilers of the texts were aware of a broader spectrum of human experience than a simple male-female binary, even if they didn't have our modern language to describe it. When we look at Buddhist cultures throughout history, we see a picture far more complex than any simple for or against. In Thailand, where I live, the existence of cat hoi, often called ladyboys, is a visible part of everyday life. You see them in markets, in restaurants, in television shows, in every corner of society. Buddhism, as the dominant cultural force, has coexisted with this reality for generations. It hasn't always affirmed it in a modern, rights-based way. But it hasn't generally persecuted it either. There's a pragmatic coexistence, a lived acceptance that doesn't always make it into official doctrine. In Japan, there's a long, well-documented history of same-sex relationships, particularly within samurai culture and, notably, within Buddhist monasteries. This tradition, known as Shudo, was an accepted part of monastic life for centuries in certain schools. It was only in the modern era, often under the influence of Western colonial attitudes that were imported and absorbed, that attitudes became more rigid and condemnatory. This illustrates something crucial. A culture's conservatism is not the same as Buddhist doctrine. Throughout its 2,500-year journey across Asia, Buddhism has acted like a great river, flowing through different landscapes and taking on the colors of the soil it passes through. It has absorbed local customs, norms, and prejudices, just as it has influenced them. The challenge for us today is to distinguish the clear, deep water of the core teachings from the sediment of cultural bias that has settled at the bottom. The core teachings are consistent. The lens of harm, craving, and awareness applies to everyone. The questions remain the same regardless of who you are or who you love. Is there craving? Is there grasping? Is there harm? These questions don't change based on gender or orientation. The texts give you a lens, not a rulebook. And that means you have to actually think, which is harder than just following a rule. Ambiguity isn't Buddhism avoiding the question. It's Buddhism asking a different question entirely. Here's a story that might help. A friend of mine named Jordan grew up in a conservative religious household. He knew from a very young age that he was gay, and he also knew, from everything he was taught, that this was wrong, sinful, something to be fought and hidden. He spent years in therapy trying to change. He prayed. He dated women, hoping something would shift. Nothing worked. The shame he carried was enormous. It affected every part of his life, including his relationship with spirituality. He eventually left his religion entirely, not because he didn't believe in God, but because he couldn't reconcile who he was with what he'd been taught. Years later, he discovered Buddhism through a friend. He approached it warily at first, expecting more of the same. But as he studied, something shifted. He realized that the tradition wasn't asking him to be someone else. It was asking him to look at his own mind. It was asking about harm and craving and awareness. And when he looked honestly, he saw that his relationships, when they were based on honesty and care, didn't cause harm. They caused connection, joy, mutual support. The grasping he saw in himself wasn't about orientation. It was about fear, the same fear everyone carries. The fear of being alone, of not being enough, of being abandoned. For the first time, Jordan felt he could be spiritual without being someone he wasn't. The lens of Buddhism didn't exclude him. It included him by asking the same questions it asks everyone. Is there harm? Is there craving? Is there awareness? He wasn't a special case. He was just another human being trying to navigate desire without causing suffering. And that, he realized, was the whole point. Now we arrive at the heart of the practice. After all this discussion about texts and traditions, about monks and lay people, about different cultures and different paths, you might be wondering what any of this has to do with you. How do you actually work with desire in your own life, right now, without becoming a monk, without spending years in a Tibetan retreat center, without feeling guilty every time you have a natural impulse? The answer is both simple and incredibly demanding. You practice. You bring awareness to the most ordinary moments of your life. You learn to see your own mind in action. And you do this over and over, thousands of times, until seeing clearly becomes your default mode of being. The Buddha's teaching methods weren't always gentle. He wasn't interested in making people comfortable. He was interested in waking them up. He would use direct, sometimes shocking methods to break through the thick armor of denial we all carry. He sent monks to meditate in charnel grounds, surrounded by decaying corpses, to confront impermanence directly, not as an abstract concept, but as a visceral, undeniable truth. He had them contemplate their own future decomposition, the inevitable fate of this body we're all so attached to. He used shock to shatter complacency. We have a modern version of this practice, and it doesn't require sitting in a cemetery. It requires sitting with our own craving. It's a practice of mindful exposure, and it's available to anyone, anytime, anywhere. Think about how we usually deal with difficult desires. There are two common strategies, and neither works very well. The first is suppression. You try to push the desire away, ignore it, pretend it's not there. You distract yourself, you judge yourself, you tell yourself you shouldn't feel this way. But suppression doesn't eliminate desire. It drives it underground. It creates tension, anxiety, a pressure that builds until it explodes or leaks out in unconscious ways. Suppressed desire doesn't disappear. It just goes into the basement, where it grows stronger in the dark. The second strategy is indulgence. You follow every impulse, act on every craving, give yourself whatever you want whenever you want it. This seems like freedom, but it's actually its own kind of prison. Indulgence reinforces the neural pathways. It makes the habit deeper, the craving stronger. You need more next time to get the same hit. You become a slave to your own impulses, jerked around like a puppet on strings. The Buddha offered a third way. Neither suppression nor indulgence. Something else entirely. Awareness. You don't push the desire away, and you don't act on it automatically. You turn toward it. You look at it directly. You feel it in your body. You watch it in your mind. You give it your full, undivided attention. Here's a story about a friend named David. David had struggled with smoking for years. He'd tried everything. Patches, gum, hypnosis, cold turkey. Nothing worked for long. The craving always came back, and eventually, it always won. One day, his meditation teacher gave him an unusual assignment. He said, "David, the next time you have a craving for a cigarette, don't try to ignore it. Don't try to fight it. Don't give in to it. Just stop whatever you're doing, sit down, and for 5 minutes, do nothing but feel the craving. Don't think about cigarettes. Don't think about why you want one. Just feel the physical and mental sensation of craving itself. Where is it in your body? Is it a tightness in your chest? A tingling in your fingers? A rushing thought in your mind? Does it have a temperature? A texture? Just watch it like a scientist watching a chemical reaction." The next day, David was on a crowded subway train heading home from work. He was tired, stressed, and the man standing next to him on the platform was smoking a cigarette just before the doors closed. The smell wafted in. And bam! The craving hit him like a wave. His hand instinctively went to his pocket where he used to keep his pack. But then he remembered the teacher's instruction. Instead of reaching for a cigarette, he closed his eyes and turned his attention inward. He felt the craving. He felt the burning sensation in his chest. He felt the frantic energy in his mind, the thoughts screaming, "You need one, just one, get off at the next stop." He just watched. He gave it his full attention. And something remarkable happened. After about 2 minutes, the burning sensation began to fade. The frantic thoughts began to quiet. The wave, having nowhere to go, having no action to fuel it, simply peaked and then subsided. He opened his eyes. The craving was gone. For the first time in his life, he had seen it clearly, and he hadn't been controlled by it. He had surfed the wave instead of being drowned by it. This is the practice. This is the core of the Buddha's method. You don't defeat craving by suppressing it. That creates tension. You don't defeat it by indulging it. That reinforces it. You transform your relationship with it by seeing it clearly. You expose it to the light of awareness until it loses its power. Now imagine applying this to sexual desire. The laboratory is your own mind, your own life. It could be as simple as the next time you feel that familiar pull of attraction, that flash of fantasy, you don't immediately act or push it away. You pause. You take a breath. And you feel it. You feel the energy in your body. You watch the stories your mind starts to tell. You see the grasping for what it is. A wave of mental and physical energy. And you learn, over time and with practice, that you don't have to be thrown around by every wave. You can learn to let them rise and pass without grabbing on or being swept away. You can learn to experience intimacy, pleasure, and connection without needing them to complete you, without building your identity around them, without collapsing when they end. This isn't about becoming cold or numb. It's about becoming free. Free to experience pleasure without addiction. Free to love without possessiveness. Free to be intimate without losing yourself. Free to let go when it's time to let go. Let me tell you another story that illustrates this practice in a different way. A friend of mine named Priya was a yoga teacher, deeply spiritual, committed to her practice. But she had a pattern that troubled her. She would go through periods of intense celibacy, sometimes for a year or more, feeling pure and spiritually advanced. And then something would shift. She'd meet someone, there'd be a whirlwind romance, and she'd dive into intense physical connection. But within weeks, sometimes days, she'd feel this wave of shame and self-judgment. She'd pull back, end things, and retreat into celibacy again, vowing to be more disciplined next time. This cycle repeated for years. One day she said to me, "I don't understand. When I'm celibate, I feel peaceful but also kind of dead inside. When I'm sexual, I feel alive but then I crash into shame. Is there no way to be both alive and at peace?" I asked her to walk me through what happened in her body and mind during that transition. When you meet someone and things become physical, what are you feeling in those first days? She closed her eyes. I feel electric. I feel seen. I feel like I'm finally waking up from a long sleep. And then? I asked. And then, she said, I start to need it. I start to need their attention, their texts, their affirmation. I start to feel anxious when they don't respond. I start to lose myself. And then I hate myself for needing them so much. So I leave. Priya's problem wasn't sex. It wasn't celibacy. It was the swing between two extremes, both driven by the same thing. Fear. On one side, fear of being overwhelmed by desire, so she built a wall of rigid celibacy. On the other side, fear of being alone, so she dove into connection without awareness. The wall would hold until the pressure built too high, and then it would crumble, and she'd be flooded. Neither was freedom. Both were reactions. The practice for Priya wasn't to choose one side or the other. It was to find the middle ground where awareness could live. To learn to be sexual without losing herself. To learn to be celibate without becoming numb. To feel desire without being controlled by it. To experience intimacy without needing it to fill a void. She started a simple practice. Whenever she felt attraction, she would pause and ask herself 3 questions before doing anything. What am I feeling in my body right now? What story is my mind telling me about this person? What am I hoping this will solve in me? She didn't judge the answers. She just observed. And over time, she started to notice patterns. She noticed that the intensity of attraction was often strongest when she was feeling lonely or insecure about her work. She noticed that her mind would create elaborate fantasies about who the person was before she even knew them. She noticed that she was often looking for someone to rescue her from uncomfortable feelings she didn't want to face. This awareness didn't make the desire go away. It didn't make her stop having relationships. But it changed the quality of her engagement. She was less likely to dive in blindly. More likely to move slowly. More able to enjoy the early stages of connection without building a whole future in her mind. And when relationships ended, as some inevitably did, she was less devastated. She had built a little more space between the event and her reaction. She had learned to surf the wave instead of being drowned by it. This is what the practice looks like in real life. It's not about getting rid of desire. It's about no longer being a slave to it. It's about creating a tiny gap between the impulse and the action, and in that gap, freedom begins to grow. Another friend, named Carlos, had a different challenge. He was in a long-term marriage, 23 years, with someone he genuinely loved. But after 2 decades, the sexual spark had faded. They were more like roommates than lovers. Carlos missed the passion, the intensity, the feeling of being desired. He started having fantasies about other women. He started wondering if he'd made a mistake, if he'd settled, if he was missing out on something essential. He came to me troubled by his own mind. He said, "I love my wife. I don't want to hurt her. But I feel dead inside. I want to feel alive again. Is that wrong?" I asked him, "When you think about other women, what are you really wanting?" He thought for a moment. "Excitement," he said. "Novelty. That feeling of possibility. And when you were first with your wife, did you have that?" "Yes," he said. "Absolutely." "So what changed?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We got comfortable. We got safe. We stopped trying. We stopped seeing each other. We're just managing a household together. Carlos wasn't addicted to sex with other women. He was addicted to the feeling of being alive, and he had forgotten how to generate that feeling within himself. He was looking for someone else to provide the electricity that had gone out in his own soul. We talked about what it would mean to bring that electricity back into his marriage. Not by demanding his wife be someone else, but by becoming more alive himself. Taking up old hobbies he'd abandoned. Exercising. Reading books that excited him. Bringing his own energy back online. And then, maybe, inviting his wife into that renewed energy, not with pressure, but with presence. He was skeptical at first. It seemed too simple. But he tried it. He started running again, something he'd loved in his 20s. He signed up for a photography class. He started playing his guitar, which had sat in the corner collecting dust for years. And slowly, something shifted. He had more energy. He had more to talk about. He was less focused on what his wife wasn't giving him and more focused on what he was bringing to the table. And after a few months, without any dramatic conversation, without any pressure, the intimacy between them began to shift. She noticed the change in him. She was drawn to his renewed energy. The spark didn't return overnight, but the possibility of it returned. Carlos learned that desire isn't something you get from someone else. It's something you cultivate within yourself. When you're alive, truly alive, that aliveness is attractive. When you're dead inside and looking for someone to resurrect you, you're just bringing your deadness to them and hoping they'll perform a miracle. That's not love. That's dependency. That's using another person as a life support system. This brings us to the most uncomfortable question of all. What are you using desire to avoid feeling? Because if you're human, you've done it. You've used pleasure like anesthesia. You've used intensity to escape ordinariness. You've used another person's desire for you as proof that you matter. The Buddha's diagnosis is radical. The problem isn't the object of desire. It's the mind of the desirer. The issue isn't the person you want. It's the wanting itself. The compulsive need that says, I need this to be okay. That neediness, that clutching at experience like a drowning person clutching at air, that's where suffering lives. Not in pleasure. Not in the act. In the grasping. And what we're grasping for is almost never what it seems. We think we want sex. But what we really want is to feel wanted. We think we want intimacy. But what we really want is to not feel alone. We think we want pleasure. But what we really want is relief from the pain of being a separate self in a confusing world. Here's a final story. A friend named Samira was a successful corporate lawyer. Brilliant, driven, accomplished. She had a beautiful apartment, a rewarding career, and relationships that looked perfect but felt empty. She came to a meditation retreat exhausted. Exhausted from performing, from achieving, from being who everyone expected her to be. On the third day, during silent walking meditation, a memory surfaced. She was 16 at a party. A boy she liked barely noticed her. She spent the whole night trying to get his attention, feeling invisible, feeling worthless. And then a thought arrived. If I'm beautiful enough, successful enough, desirable enough, then everyone will notice me. Then I'll matter. She realized she had been living that 16-year-old strategy her entire adult life. Every achievement, every relationship, every curated image was a performance for an audience that didn't exist. She was still trying to get the boy at the party to notice her. Still trying to prove she mattered. Samira wasn't addicted to sex. She was addicted to validation. She used desire as a mirror to reflect back an image of herself that felt worthy. Without that mirror, she felt invisible. Without that reflection, she didn't know who she was. This is the deep work Buddhism invites us into. Not just managing behavior, but understanding motivations. Not just controlling desires, but seeing what they're really about. Not asking is this allowed, but asking what void am I trying to fill? What fear am I trying to escape? The answers are different for everyone. For Elena, it was escaping ordinariness. For Marcus, escaping fear of abandonment. For Priya, escaping discomfort with herself. For Carlos, escaping feeling dead inside. For Samira, escaping the terror of being invisible. The pattern is universal. We use desire as a drug. Pleasure as a painkiller. Other people as mirrors, as proof we exist. And then we wonder why relationships feel hollow, why pleasure fades, why we're empty after getting what we wanted. The Buddha's teaching offers a way out. Not by denying desire, but by understanding it. Not by suppressing pleasure, but by seeing its nature. Not by becoming ascetic, but by becoming aware. Imagine experiencing desire without being controlled by it. Feeling attraction without needing to act. Enjoying intimacy without possessing. Experiencing pleasure without building identity around it. Letting go when it's time, without collapsing. This is freedom. Not freedom to do anything. That's just slavery to impulse. Real freedom is freedom from needing anything outside yourself to feel complete. Freedom to be present with whatever arises, without grasping or pushing away. Here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop needing pleasure to feel okay, you're actually more available to enjoy it. When you stop grasping at people, you're actually more capable of genuine intimacy. When you stop using desire as anesthetic, you're more alive to the full range of experience. The practice is simple. Pay attention. When desire arises, don't judge, don't automatically act, don't push away. Just feel it. In your body. In your mind. See it as a wave that arises and passes. You don't have to be thrown by every wave. You can learn to surf. The Buddha didn't offer a rulebook. Life is too complex for rules. He offered a mirror. He said, look. See for yourself. See how craving creates suffering. See how letting go creates freedom. See how awareness transforms everything. This is the invitation. Not to become someone else. Not to follow someone else's rules. But to see yourself clearly. To understand your desires, your fears, your patterns. To make peace with the whole messy, beautiful experience of being human. Thank you for walking this path with me. If these reflections were valuable, please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to continue this exploration, please subscribe to Monk's Temple. Until next time, take care of that beautiful, complicated mind of yours. Breathe. Notice. Be kind to yourself. The path unfolds one moment at a time.